episode of Manufacturing Growth Talks. I'm your host, Dan Burgos, and I'm joined by another colleague, another executive in the manufacturing sector, and his name is Miguel Medina. And so I wanted to give him a warm welcome. So, welcome, Miguel.
Dan, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to this. So, for those of our listeners that are not familiar with your journey, can you share just at a high level your journey so far, where you've been, and what you've done thus far?
Sure, of course. I'm the VP of operations at a company called Strong Arm Design. So we do the sort of custom design and manufacturing of ergonomic and ruggedized interface systems. So like the unit you see behind me, that stainless steel mobile cart biofarm. In the healthcare sector, we do things like nurse carts, wall arms, things like that. My journey started off in the early 2000s, maybe mid 2000s. So 18, I joined a piezoelectric ceramic manufacturer. So these are components that go into sonar systems, transducers, so commercial fishing, the Navy, things like that. I did that while getting my engineering degree, which was quite formative for kind of the philosophy of having the frontline operator perspective. Um, and from there, I became an intern. I got my chemical engineering degree. I ended up that was in California, and I was born and raised in California. Ended up coming over to the East Coast, originally South Jersey, to join a tech startup, which also was a piezoelectric manufacturer. So I was there for almost 10 years. Along the way, I did everything, everything from cleaning the bathrooms to designing the process to doing the fundraising and, going out to New York City with our CEO to do fundraising, the actual engineering and quality and all that. So I learned a lot there, and that also was pretty formative in my development. Now I've been at Strongarm for about goes going on 7 years now, this March.
Very good. Thanks so much for sharing that. You weren't kidding when you said you were doing everything from cleaning bathrooms to fundraising. That I bet they don't teach you that in school.
They don't teach you that in MBA. Yeah, there's always the resilience training course that you get in an MBA. I was like, well, why do I need that? Can we all clean the bathrooms together? I'll show you guys a little bit of resilience.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. So let's kind of go back to your beginning. So why'd you end up in manufacturing? What drew you in? And you said chemical engineering, so interesting there, combination. But just curious, what drew you into those fields?
So I originally went to college as a history major. I wanted to be a history teacher. And luckily for me, I had a lot of good teachers that were kind of like, hey, maybe you should not, unless you're going into some specific institution to teach public school for what you want to do, which they knew I was into. The reason I wanted to be a teacher was coaching, mentoring, and development, which jump forward to the present. Absolutely the most fulfilling part of my job is getting to do that every day. But back to the past, is I think what really drew me to chemical engineering, to be quite honest, was it was the hardest major. At least at the time, it was considered the most difficult undergraduate major. I'm like, that's for me, right? High achiever, maybe, past trauma with parents and stuff like that, but very high achiever. I wanted to make my family proud. I wanted to be proud of myself. I wanted to be able to support a future family. So I got into that. It wasn't completely random. I liked math and science. I was always really good at math, especially. So um, the manufacturing I got because that my dad worked there. He was the plant manager at the time, and so that was kind of arbitrary, but ended up being very closely aligned with the chemical engineering on the material science, not so much the chemical processes, but definitely on the material science of it. And I think it was very good to have both at the same time because this was a very dirty job, full gown, full respirator, no air conditioning. Um, and so having that on a day-to-day basis and then being like, is this what I want to do for the rest of my life? Or, can I do something more with engineering? It was a humbling and very motivating experience, especially my first quarter at school. I had quite a tough transition. I was on academic probation, so I definitely had that existential moment where like, oh crap, like I there's no guarantee that I'm going to be successful at this. I have nothing to fall back on. So I gotta kind of figure this figure this stuff out pretty quick.
Yeah, they put you to the test pretty early, didn't they?
Yep.
So you mentioned something. I wasn't planning on asking you this so soon, but since it came up, I think seize the moment. You mentioned that coaching, collaborating with other people, that's something that it's something of a passion, something you enjoy. And so I noticed you're part of SCORE mentors. Is that part of where that comes from when it comes to joining an organization like SCORE, where there's coaches helping folks? Tell us a little bit about that.
For sure. Yeah, I like to do a lot of that stuff, on the side. And SCORE it's an organization that originally developed from the Small Business Administration. And nowadays it's got chapters all over the US, thousands of mentors. And the Philadelphia region where I'm at now, there's, I think, around 100 of us in the greater Philadelphia area serving a few million people. And yeah, we take entrepreneurs, people starting a business, people running a business, everything from starting a food truck to, starting a manufacturing facility. And we mentor them through the process. So that's something that scratches that itch even more and, allows me to give back time to the community. I think where I really developed that passion was in grade school. So before I was in manufacturing, I did tutoring part-time while in high school and then in elementary school. And this is something I didn't really kind of dwell upon until recently when I was thinking about it, is I went to a Montessori school. So that's go at your own pace at a high level. But
Right.
what it really was, especially with math, was, hey, there's a this month's module for math. Miguel finished it in 3 days or whatever. Okay, he gets to spend the rest of the month tutoring everyone else to catch up to him. And by the way, I sucked at reading and stuff, so that was the thing that I usually needed help with. But with math, I tutored all through elementary school, my peers, and I was a diverse set of people. It's Spanish speakers, people from Indochina, Hmong and Vietnamese and Thai. Yeah, kids my own age didn't necessarily speak any English, and I think from a very young age, going through that challenge of let me put myself in their shoes, let me figure out what their perspective is on this, how they're seeing this problem, how I can help them understand this from a very giving and very selfless, because I wasn't paid to do that, right? No concept of how does this benefit me, right? That was between the ages of 5 and 9. Like I had no concept of that. So I think that's what really developed that skill set early on, and the passion early on. And then when I understood that that's really what I like the most out of what I do, and was very intentional, very deliberate about developing those skill sets through the internship, through the manufacturing role, through the young engineer role, through the manager role, and all along the way, I've had people support me and people come to me and say, I never wanted to be a manager, and people would come to me even as a intern and say, oh my God, Miguel, you actually listen.
There
Can
you
you be
go.
my manager? It's like this 20-year-old, punk kid going to college, right? Living on scraps. Like it always hit me quite existentially, like, oh, is this what I should do? Are people just like, imposter syndrome? Are people
Sure.
actually saying this because they think I have a affinity for it, or are they just, BSing me? It took me a while to say, you know what, I think I actually they have the best of intentions, and let me develop this.
That's good. I had somewhat of an epiphany this last weekend, and I kind of came up with a quote, and love to hear your thoughts on this. But the quote I put out there, it's you'll see it in social media in the next few days, but it says, if you don't have the patience to coach or the courage to hold someone accountable, maybe you shouldn't be a leader. Because I think it's so foundational. What do you think about that?
Absolutely agree. I think especially the patience key. I think a lot of times because we're both in these leadership circles, peer groups and things like that, where they, help self-development. And I think that's one thing that they often maybe infer but forget is just talk about patience. I think
Yeah,
one thing that they do mention is like, hey, your attitude's contagious. And that's part of patience. But yeah, I love that. I think the best leaders are some of the most patient people and even tempered people.
absolutely.
And it's a
Even
skill. It's a virtue, right? Grandma Abuela Medina said it was that patience was a was a virtue.
some people don't value it, but in certain situations, it can definitely be handy. So great. Thanks so much for sharing that. So let's kind of walk again. Now you had that I guess that aptitude towards coaching, which served you well in your early years, and now you finish college, and now you're off to the working world. How was that transition for you? So you did some internships, but now you're in there. This is kind of what you dedicate your how you earn a living.
Yeah, I think that was a good transformation to move, on the East Coast, away from my family and do something totally new with a new group of people. And I think some of my most formative experiences with that was working with, the people. So it was a startup, right? So there was, five or six of us, and I was the least senior person. But as we grew and as we implemented processes, I became the person that was doing the hiring and, teaching the new hires how to do this process or that process. And at the same time, I was also, doing some Six Sigma classes and thinking about getting an MBA. And it aligned really well with what I was teaching, where like, hey, just because it's trivial to me doesn't mean it's trivial to somebody else. And right, and then it kind of reminded me of engineering school, where, we'd be learning about something super esoteric like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, and the professor would like, it's just you just cross out psi. It's zero, right? And it's like I have no idea what that means. Like I understand it's trivial to a PhD level, scientist. This is the first time I've ever seen that equation in my life. I don't know how to do this, right? It has nothing to do with aptitude or intellect. I just haven't seen it before. I need some
Right.
time to get some reps in. And that comes back to the patience that you were talking about. So I think learning to empathize with your colleagues, people under your charge, learning that stuff's not trivial, that people are intelligent, people are very intelligent at all levels of intellect. And if you give them the time of day, listen to what they need, give them the resources they need to excel, do a bit of leadership to engage them, they will knock it out of the park every time at pretty much every level of aptitude or education or whatever. People will surprise you to the upside. I think that's what I really learned and was really formative with that experience and the experience before as an intern and as an operator.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. One thing that caught my attention from what you were sharing was you made a transition from California, West Coast to the East Coast. Very different city, the people around there, the demographics are different, and so forth. So that must have been somewhat of a culture shock for you. And in addition to making a transition from college life to actually working and just being kind of a functioning adult, what did you learn about culture there when it comes to adapting? Okay, I'm the one that made the change. I'm the one that left. I finished college. Here I am. I got to find a way to fit in. Or how was that experience for you?
It was a fun experience. You know, I was ready to make the move at the time and make a change. I didn't like leaving my extended family, but as far as the culture shock, I loved it. I love how direct people are over here on the East Coast, especially
Oh,
in
that's for
Philly.
sure.
I'm gonna mess up a story, but there's always like the little story about like on the West Coast, if you get a flat tire, somebody will stop by the roads. Oh man, that really sucks. Yeah, flat tires suck, kind of thing, and empathize heavily, but not necessarily help you. Whereas on the East Coast, they'll stop by like, "Hey, what you dumb? You have a flat tire? Don't you know how to change a tire?" And move out of the way. Let me show you, right? So there's kind of like a there's kind of I don't know if that's completely accurate, but as far as like the direct in your face, it's not for everyone, but I certainly like it. And I know when I go back to the West Coast, that's usually where I get the culture shock. Where people are so
Oh, yeah.
nice,
Yeah.
people will talk to you, you know, you go order a coffee or at a restaurant, you know, like, oh my God, people are actually pleasant to be around.
Yes. Especially, I've had that experience for sure in New York City for sure. But let me ask you this. So you said the culture shock. Um, almost lost my train of thought of the question I was going to ask you, but it was related to the culture and the transition. Uh, what did you learn from that? From, oh yeah, here's the question. Did it rub off on you? Because when we go into a culture, you either affect the culture or the culture or the culture changes you, right? So which
Mm.
way it was, and what did you learn from that? Did you become more direct or the other way around? And what did you learn from that?
For sure. Yeah. My brother is he doesn't have a filter, so he tells me when I visit, he's, you know, Miguel, you're kind of a bit of an a-hole, right? But that's just him being funny. But I think the part that I really learned that rubbed off was when to be direct. It was to me, I'm a introvert at heart. Probably most people wouldn't believe it, but I'm pretty kind, very patient, very reserved person in my personal life. So I'm not one to be direct naturally. But to me, in the service of others, I know how to be direct and I'll be direct, right? So that's always so like a good example is policy. So like one of the things it's indirectly answering your question, but one of the things here when I first came to Strong Arm was culture change and leading that. And one thing was with policy, just making it consistent across our departments, new policies that align with our new cultural direction. And one of the things that I find to coach managers most often is, well, I don't want to, yeah, I got to work with this person every day. I don't want to be, you know, tough on them or whatever. And it's like, it's not about being tough. It's about being consistent and be direct, right?
Absolutely.
If you don't do anything, that's disrespectful to everyone else. Right. So you got to think about that you're not, it's not you and this one person in a vacuum that you need to chastise them or whatever. It's the entire department. That one person getting away with the one thing is demotivating everyone else. And it's disrespectful to everyone else if you don't do anything. And I think that part of it is where I think you can be direct. And I do that all the time. And you know, when I'm occasionally involved in these types of disciplinary meetings or coaching meetings or whatever. And I often tell the other individual because they'll start defending and whatever. I'd say, can I be direct with you for a second? Sure, right? Have their buy-in. It's like, and then go from there, right? So I think that's a different avenue, right? On the West Coast, we would say, let me maybe can I be real with you for a second?
Right, right.
So I
More
think
subtle.
I think that's the thing that really rubbed off on me about that it's okay to be direct when it's coming from a place of service, coming from a place of love, right? As you can use that as part of your toolbox.
Absolutely.
There's another thing in the MBA where they say like avoidance is the worst form of sort of conflict resolution, and it is. But there's also a time and a place, right? Where sometimes you just need to bite your tongue. It's this a CEO of a new customer and says something off color they didn't like. I think the best strategy there is avoidance.
Right, right. Each
Right?
strategy
Nobody
has its
teaches you
place.
that.
I'm with you. I'm with you. I'll say, yeah. The way I've learned it, I guess, is you can be assertive or empathize, but do it with support. Like I can tell you that you made a mistake or there's something that needs to change. But in the same sense, I can tell you I value your work so much. You've done so well, but there's something we need to change, and you can just take ownership to that and have a be accountable to it without feeling like someone's just chastising you, to borrow from your description there. And one of the reasons I asked you that question is that because, and you did it so well, human interaction, culture, these contrasts between the way we think, make decisions, and function translate and just make their way from our personal lives all the way to our work lives. And it's just fascinating to see. And one thing you said that it's so valuable, it's consistency with like policies and things, so that from department to department, everyone knows that the expectations are the same. So thank you for sharing that. So, okay, in that role, I think you were. Oh no, the other thing I was going to ask you was you started one of your early experiences was with a startup, and tell us about that type of culture in your mind as it contrasts with an established business where you have professional managers, whereas in a startup you almost wear any hat, like we established at the beginning of the conversation, right? So tell us about what was different to you and what was maybe favorable and unfavorable in those scenarios.
That's a good question. And I think there's kind of the two biggest pros and cons are having an established institutionalized company is you have structure. And in a startup, you have no structure.
No structure whatsoever.
And you can't emphasize that enough, and there's no real way to underscore the lack of structure. So the positive to that is you get to create structure. You can be very creative. And I think sometimes as engineers, we're used to designing and problem solving, not necessarily always being creative, creating, going from nothing to something, which is a lot harder. We know how to improve, but even continuous improvement, Lean Six Sigma, it's improving something that's existing, but how do you go from nothing to something? That's where the opportunity is there and where the excitement was there. But the challenges with the structure are they're real sometimes because you're not just doing something for your boss or yourself. The CEO's involved, the customers involved, the investors are heavily involved at that time, right? Because they want to see some return, um, or at least some improvement of what's happening and return in the future at the very least. So sometimes people are involved where they shouldn't be involved. I know a good example was that jumps to mind was we had these are the ceramic, big ceramic bar, maybe 7-8 inches, and the customer, this is a fishing in the New England area. They wanted we usually put a red stamp on the positive side. They wanted a epoxy stamp on the positive side. So the difference was the stamp was usually like a 1 minute curing at 120 degrees Fahrenheit, but the epoxy was a 4 hour cure. And I remember the CEO came in, I was finishing this. This was like 6 o'clock at night. And next day there's the cutoff is 7 at the FedEx store, right?
Mm.
And it's like these have to go tonight no matter what, right? And it was like, okay, well, they need this epoxy and it's a 4 hour cure, and we have 1 hour and I still have to pack them. It's not possible, right? I don't care. You got 40 minutes, like get it done. It's okay. Well, I was like, they're gonna reject them. It's not gonna be dry. I can pack them after 40 minutes and get them over, with minutes to spare, but they're gonna reject them. Like, what can we at least talk to them, get them on the phone? No, get it done, right? So I did. And sure enough, the next day they say, hey, the epoxy's still wet. We're sending these back. And they didn't send them back next day air. They send them snail mail.
Oh,
So
wow.
they end up getting these, like, almost like a week and a half later because of this. So those are the type I've talked about this before with having like anti-mentors and like, being in a leadership position now, not understanding the problems that me having been in that position, that when I hear that or some version of that from whether it's an engineer or a frontline person here or anywhere, and they say, well, that's, you know, whether they, shake their head or some sort of subtle body cue is what's going on? What am I missing? Right? I must be missing something. I know because I've
Wow.
been in your shoes and I know that I'm missing something, right? Let me know what it is. So that's the power of those experiences. And you'll have those experiences even if you're not in the startup, but I think you'll have them a little bit more often in the startup just because things are so uh chaotic. You don't
Yes.
have that. Sometimes the structure is a like something I hear people saying now here is like, oh, well, that's policy, right? And when you don't have that in a tech startup, you can't rely on those sort of institutional barriers for good or for bad.
Man, you made me think. In my career, I started with very big companies, multi-billion-dollar companies. And as my career progressed, I just started migrating to smaller and smaller and smaller companies because, like you said, right, there's pros and cons to every one of those. But at least for me, it was I wanted to learn as much as I can. And when you work in a very large business, you don't have that luxury. You almost have to stick to your function, or really over a really long time get exposure to different parts of the business. And so what you said there is something that I think it's so fundamental to being a leader. And what I mean by that is having that emotional intelligence, being able to read people when they react, and connecting the dots that something's missing, and having the courage and the vulnerability to say, I'm missing something, meaning I'm the one that needs to understand this fully. Please educate me. Please enlighten me. Please tell me what it is I'm missing. And I feel that's something that at least I find in the business that we visit, at least in the mid levels. I mean by that, sometimes director level, manager level, supervisor level, lead level, that is to some degree deficient. And so, do you see that, and how can people, listening, develop that in their teams? Because you don't always have the luxury to have everybody go through those experiences, but you absolutely need it for the business to be long-term sustainable with a good bench of leaders to sustain it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I've seen that working with a lot of big companies as well. I see that a lot at every level, communication, especially the at our level. But for the question, for the mid level, I think the best way is to have some self-awareness. Um, Go back to, whatever other experience where you got to practice some humility and take that as analogy. So one thing that maybe not anymore, but back in my youth is big gym rat. I still work out a lot, but I'm not in the perfect shape like I was back in the day. Um, but anyway, one of the things that you say when you lift weights is check your ego at the door. Especially if you come back from vacation, you haven't done any bench presses in 2 weeks, and you come back and you try to bench press, your same weight, you're gonna pull a muscle, you're gonna
Yeah.
drop something, right? So anyway, part of that is check your ego at the door and get your reps in. So with respect to communication, having tough conversations, being able to practice empathy, a lot of these things, some people have higher affinity or not, but it doesn't really matter. It's having the self-awareness to say, hey, this is not my strongest skill. And even if it is, I have room to grow. Let me take this as anything other, like the gym. Let me get my reps in and let me practice. And let me be vulnerable. It is vulnerable. You don't have to say, hey, I'm being vulnerable. I'm going to ask you this question, but acknowledge to yourself that, the reason I'm not saying this is because I feel vulnerable for some reason. Either I'm have trepidation, or I just don't want to talk to that person, or I think I'm the smartest person. Whatever the heck the reason is, just shut it down and take a novice approach to it. Take a learning and self-development approach. We had a good lead. This was a story a couple years ago, and she was the welding lead. So she was responsible for a lot of things in the welding department, but in particular in this story, it was a new safety thing. So we didn't do a lot of MIG welding, so we do all TIG welding. But we started to insource some of our MIG welding, which became a fire hazard that we weren't necessarily ready for. So the towels, we needed to start putting them in metal containers instead of the rags that we used to clean the material before they
Right.
started welding, because it was a fire hazard. Um, and so she was in charge of, hey, we got all the metal containers, make sure they get installed and let everyone know that they have to replace the old trash cans with the metal trash cans. And there was one welder that didn't do it. And she's asking, our HR um, to oh, we get a write up or whatever. Hold up. I got involved here. What is the problem? This is a learning opportunity. And I was actually coaching her at the time, and she learned a lot. She doesn't work here anymore, by the way, so I think I'm fine with the story. But in any case, she did learn a lot. But in that coaching, I said, okay, why is he not doing this? So well, he won't want to. Well, how do you know that? Did you not give him the context, tell him the why, and show him? No, he won't like that. Well, have you even tried? Just tell him, right? Let me show you, right? So she kind of stood at a distance, and I came over, and I said to him, I'll make up a name. Just let's say Mike. Mike's a common name, right? Let's just say I say, hey Mike, do we have the new metal trash cans? Because it's a new safety policy. Do you have any problem with that? Or are there any issues or whatever that you see, or do you need any help installing it, whatever. It's like, oh, well, why are we using? She's like, I don't understand why. I was like, well, because we're MIG welding now and it's easier to catch fire, so we need that stuff in the metal can. He's like, you want me to put all my rags in a metal trash can? I was like, yes. And I said, I can do that, right? No problem.
Yeah.
So it's like, I get what she meant, that he was kind of abrasive, but it's like, just have the conversation, right? You'll be surprised. And he was super engaged about it. He was probably the most engaged out of all of them in terms of like, okay, I need to do this now, right? But he's just like everyone else, whether they're abrasive or agreeable or disagreeable. They want to know why, right? Why is this important to me? Am I losing agency or am I gaining agency, right? So that's a
You
good
know, that's a,
example of
that's
that.
a great example, I was going to say, of having that patience and also being inquisitive. And I always tell people, you have to understand their line of thinking. How are they thinking? Their frame of reference is this is better, this is faster, this is what I need, as opposed to this. You have to get to that level so you can either they teach you something because you say, oh, that's actually a good point. I never thought about that.
Yep.
Or you can actually find the deficiency, the interpretation that's wrong, or whatever the case may be, so that you can help them, you can impact their thinking. I always say there's a big difference between telling someone something or helping them realize something,
Yep.
right? It's when you get that, oh, why didn't I think of that? You don't have to say anything else, and that's a skill. But and I can see you have it, but the bigger challenge is, I mean, you illustrated it, right? You took a leader, you led by example, you showed them how it was. Is that what it takes? Is that what other leaders should be doing with their direct reports to elevate that leadership? Which I think it's a gap in our industry.
I think it absolutely does. And I think the pushback is I don't have time for that, right?
Yes.
And say, well, Miguel, that's great for a 100-person company, but I'm a 100,000-person company, right? But it's the same thing. It's part of the continuous improvement principle of a Gemba walk. Go see the problem for yourself, right? Take the time to do it. Can't cancel a meeting, whatever. Go or during a meeting, say instead of having this meeting, let's just go to the shop floor or the wherever the process is taking place. Let's go and let's go just see and just ask and observe. So yes, I think that's needed. A more or as important question is how do you sustain that when you don't have time? Is you have to figure out strong processes to institutionalize that, right?
Yes.
So and you have to find and engage people that will take that to whom you can delegate because yes, you can't do it all yourself, but so it's yes, delegate. Yes, find these strong processes to institutionalize, but you still got to go back to basics at least once or twice a week and manually, do that.
Yeah.
It's important. They need to see. It has to be you. It has to be the leader, right? Whether you think you're the best at it or not, it's not always about that. It means a lot to somebody, and we've been on the operator, floor as operators. We know when the president comes down, or the vice president, or the CEO, or the owner, when they come down to look at a problem and listen, that speaks volumes and sustains motivation for weeks, sometimes forever, right? So remember that time that Tom came down and he asked me about my the new machine. He asked me if I could see it, and this one hold 1,000 programs, the other one only held 10 programs, and this sort of thing. That means a lot. So take the time to do that because it's worth the investment. It doesn't always seem it from your perspective, but it is absolutely worth the investment from a holistic perspective.
I'm so glad you used that word because that's the same word I use. You have to see it as an investment. And I've used this way to show it a short-term thinking leader versus a long-term thinking leader. The former, I see it as you're chasing results versus building it. You're building people, you're building processes, and that gets you the results as opposed to chasing the result or forcing it without, establishing something that's sustainable that will last for the long term. So you mentioned, and we talked about this off camera, and then I want to talk about your transformation at Strong Arm and all the things you guys have done. Sounds like you've done amazing things, but we talked off camera about in your journey you had the opportunity to work with leaders that were supportive of continuous improvement or of all this mindset of being proactive and building sustainable things, and then the opposite of that. Can you, give us a little bit of what did that look like? How did that affect the business? And I want to make it tangible if you can. Things like that people at the highest levels were they're reporting to the board in terms of free cash flow, financials, operational metrics, things like that. What were those parallels between those two experiences that you mentioned to me before?
It's a very good question and a very powerful question. I remember we did talk about that, and I have a few examples that I think help push the point across. And the difference between a supportive leader or colleague, because sometimes we're the leader, but we have a colleague who's way more of it, like our chief engineer, right? For my case, I don't know how to do the mechanical engineering to that degree. There's a concept of managing up, right? And it's kind of the same thing in reverse. Check your ego at the door and be a learner, take an opposite approach and listen and manage up. But as far as, eliciting support when it's not necessarily there or whatever. But the difference between a supportive manager or CEO or whatever and a not a supportive one is markedly different. It's not just motivation, it's a big part of it, but it's also just those barriers we talked about, like the institutional barriers or policy barriers. You absolutely need support from the highest levels to really affect change and really input processes and cultural philosophy and value changes and that sort of thing. If you don't have their support, it's gonna fall flat. It's gonna run out of gas. It's not gonna be able to be sustained. So a good example of um, unsupportive was try to convey this in a way that is I think I can. So this was at another company I worked at in between very briefly, and we had a new marketing initiative, and I was working with the CEO and the marketing director, and the marketing director came up with a brilliant new website, right? This was like a 1990s website to like a new website of 2015 or whatever year it was, and it was so much better. And we presented it to she did most of it, just a little input from me, but we presented it to the CEO, and the CEO says, he's just shaking his head the whole time. And
What?
we're like, what's the problem? So I was like, what's the, I won't say his name, but so okay, what are you seeing? What's the problem? He's like, did you guys even print it out? And we're like, what? What do you mean? He said, did you print it out? I was like a printer, like hit, Control P and actually like looked at it on a piece of paper. He's like, did you guys do that? Like, why would we do that? And then he went on a tirade about it's not a real website unless it looks good printed out.
Oh my
And
gosh, I hadn't heard that before.
there's a lot of lessons there where it was like, missing the forest through the trees, first of all, having an unsupportive, and there's a reason why both the marketing director and I do not work there anymore. As brilliant as this person was, and I have a lot of respect for him, a brilliant scientist. But that's the kind of like, we can't do we can't do what you hired us for if we don't have support. But back to the other thing is, I think now that I have more skill set managing up is the same thing in reverse. How can I empathize? What is he really getting at? And now I know what he meant. I still wholeheartedly disagree with his approach, but I know what he meant. He meant that the person looking at this needs to be able to see the specs. That the most important thing isn't our product um, sort of photo, but our product specifications. So that should be, so if you're looking like at a car company, right? There's a difference between a car company that says, hey, this is what our car is, that's the aesthetic, versus this is 1,000 horsepower beast, right? And that's the
Right.
first thing you see. So I get it, but unfortunately, there wasn't that communication there. So at all those levels and those various positions, I think that was a good lesson for all of us on how to approach those types of issues, as being supportive leader and a supportive subordinate. And that's something that people don't talk about either. So I think that that doesn't completely answer the question the way you asked it, but I think that's kind of a good case study of
Yeah,
that. Doesn't
yeah,
look
yeah.
good
No,
printed out.
I get it.
Oh, you're
I'm
right.
glad
It
you did.
doesn't. It looks terrible.
Yeah, but I'm glad you didn't use necessarily a manufacturing example, which which conveys the fact that this happens across the entire organization. It doesn't matter if it's HR or marketing, engineering, or even operations. The one question I cannot let you go without asking is, tell me about the transformation you guys have gone through at Strong Arm. What changes have you seen? What do you think has been key for success? Uh, as a team, as a culture, and what were things before, and what results have you seen as a result of the things you guys have implemented? Again, operationally or financially, if you can share any of it. And even it could be improvement ratios. It doesn't have to be specific figures, of course. I don't want you to reveal anything that's
I
sensitive
can. Yeah.
information.
Yeah. So when we started here, so our company had been around since the late 80s, incorporated in 1990. And our founder had retired, and I came in, and the person that was in my position before he became the president. So when I came in, so as far as our products, our customers, very mature, institutionalized, but processes, um, amazing that everything got done, but the processes were actually closer to a startup. So to me, I was like, oh my gosh, this is just a bigger version of the startup, which meant the impact was bigger, but also the way things compounded or snowballed, either positively or negative, were a magnitude or two greater. So it's very tough. But the thing that was, as far as a supportive CEO, that right away within the first week, I said to my CEO, like, hey, all this stuff that I was supposed to come in to do, as far as operational productivity, we gotta. That's 6 months from now. Right now, this is culture. We got to have a big culture change initiative. And he's like, you know what? You're right. You got my support. Let me know what you need, and you got this. I hired you for a reason, and we did. So what we did was look at our values, sort of alter them a bit to what we think actually makes sense, and then align that with the continuous improvement methodology that I was brought in for. And the way I always like to, not to take too long on the question, but the my philosophy is blame process is not people, which means take the process approach and they say, hey, operator error doesn't exist. Not that it does in real life, of course, operator exists, but it's about preventative action. It's about root cause, right? So the classic example is the ATM machine, which maybe a lot of us don't use anymore, but maybe for us older folks, maybe
Yeah.
remember the ATM machine. So if you ever found yourself at an ATM machine, you put in your card, do whatever, withdraw whatever, and then there's a moment where you just kind of are standing there and there's a beeping sound and you're like, what is going on? What am I doing? And you're like, oh, it's beeping at me because I need to take my card out before the cash dispenses, right? And for those of us that remember even further back, it didn't used to do that. And people would just leave their card there all the time. And you could very easily say, well, operator error, everybody is stupid, right? We need to replace people. They can never use an ATM, right?
Right.
It's no, you got to input those error proofing processes. So that concept, we aligned with our values, we aligned with bonuses, we aligned it with merit-based raises, with the way we do reviews every 6 months. So let's on a very holistic, very strategic level, this is where we want to be in 3 to 5 years. This is the culture that is going to get us there. And as we implement and institutionalize those cultural values, it's let's do this process. Does this process align with our values? Yes, let's keep doing it and iterate that, right? Does this process align with our values? No, let's rethink this and then iterate it. So, without getting into details, it was massive increases. I can't say the numbers, but it was very close to 40% increase in productivity per employee that we had that
That's
first
great.
like 2.5, 3 year period. It was massive. And in terms of gross margin and things like that, it was massive on the order of like 15%
That's good.
magnitude increase. So if we say I'm not going to give the numbers, but let's just say arbitrarily we were at 50% gross margin. Then we were realizing 65% gross margin. So it was huge, huge
That's
numbers.
great. That's
And
great.
we've been able to sustain that. We still have the same problems that we had before, but we have different starting points and different methods and processes from which to iterate those mistakes out and iterate those challenges out.
Thank you so much for illustrating that. I feel like what you said is so key about 3 to 5 year strategy. We have a culture that needs to marry that and support it and get us there. And I think that's one of the other gaps that out there I see from leaders, where they see leadership, strategy and culture as two separate things. There's many of them that I've met that I completely get it. But to make that connection and really, like you said, institutionalize it, codify it into the culture, and maintain it as a way of functioning the business, kudos to you guys. And then the other point is, other leaders see culture as this pie in the sky, fluffy or just not tangible thing, but it just proves what you just said, the impact that culture can have in your business in so many ways, permeating throughout the business, retaining people, making people more productive, growth, profitability, and so on and so forth. So kudos to you guys. So winding down, I wanted to ask you, uh, what's helped you make that connection so well, so that other people, other leaders can grasp those concepts in a way that can become practical, applicable, and not just a vague, ambiguous concept that they don't feel it's actionable. It could be a book, it could be an experience, it could be a mentor, anything like that that helped you, or a framework, possibly even.
I think that's a very good question because that's a very long uh discussion. But I think the best thing, I'm gonna say maybe three things. So the first part I would say is coming back to the patience and the humility and the empathy is one thing I've said a lot, and one of the approaches I take a lot. Yeah, I couldn't do it without the staff here, by the way.
Oh, of
They
course.
own the success. I'm just the coach.
You're the enabler,
They're
I
the ones
guess.
who actually are out there in the trenches doing the work. But I think is I take the approach that um they are the experts. They're always the experts. Even if I'm the expert, they do it every day and they see it every day. I don't see that, right? So I have to humble myself and approach it. They're the experts, right? I've often said that I want to be, my goal is to be the most incompetent person that works here. So, and they're like, "What? Why would
That's
you say
awesome.
that?" So, well, everyone else is more competent at their process as the process owner than I am, which makes me the most incompetent person, right?
Yeah, there you
Which
go.
by
You enable them
our,
now.
our chief engineer was very kind and says, no, that makes you the person with the most incompetencies. It's okay, very good. I'll take that. But it's going back to there's two books that I would recommend. One is any of the Brene Brown books if you've never read them. I know coming from manufacturing, that type of kumbaya type. I don't want to read that. That's too girly or that's too kumbaya.
Oh yeah.
Read it. Absolutely read it. She's a Southern Texas gal. So she can give it to you direct and straight. She should have been born on the East Coast. She's great. And then the other book is the Eli Goldratt book. It's called The Goal.
Oh yeah.
Um, and that's a narrative version of continuous improvement, but especially in manufacturing, is every single example he goes through, there's something that will strike a chord, whether it's the challenges he has, with his wife, challenges with seeing his kid often enough, or challenges with, the supervisor that knows the code for the ERP but is impossible to talk to and pisses people off. That's a awesome book to read. It's a pretty short book. So those two books, and other than that, it's you know, put yourself in people's shoes. Understand that your perspective um is not the only perspective. Listen, gain, I don't know if you ever remember the show Captain Planet, but there was a they all put their rings together and there was with our powers combined, we
Oh,
make
I don't know why I
Captain.
hated that show growing up. I didn't. It was one of those I can't put my finger on it, but I just hated
It's an
it.
awful
Every time
show.
I
Don't
saw the
watch
guy with
it.
the green hair, I'm like, I'm out.
Yes, yes, the guy with the green hair. But I think it was like a Ted Turner like propaganda piece or whatever. But anyway, I always think about that is as a team, you're far stronger. You don't have to like the people on your team. Better if you do, but you do have to trust them. So I think that would be my
Yeah.
one piece of advice is if my other piece of advice is go on the shop floor to earn that trust, the corollary to that is there has to be trust, right? That doesn't necessarily mean you get along better if you get along, but it's that trust. If you don't have the trust, you got to have that and you got to make an effort um, to do that. And that's part of the hard stuff and why we get paid the big bucks because it's such an abstract thing that to have to manage, but it's absolutely important um to do.
Man, Miguel, thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed this more than I expected, and it's thanks to you and sharing your insights. And thank you so much for being open with sharing. If people want to follow up, check in with you, connect, what's the best way to get a hold of you if someone wants to kind of connect with you later after this?
Strongarm.com. And then on my LinkedIn, or just go to Strongarm's LinkedIn. There's a link there on the strongarm.com website, and just go to LinkedIn and connect. And I love to network. I love advocacy, mentorship, peer networking, that sort of thing. So yeah, please feel free to reach out to me, and especially if you're in the Philly area, anywhere, but especially in the Philly area.
Sounds good. So there you have it, folks. Another story. Again, thank you, Miguel, for sharing. And if you're listening to this and you lead a team of people in manufacturing, and you want to share, you have stories to share, and are open to sharing, like to be featured in a future episode, please reach out. We'd love to have you. Thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you next time.